Daniel Harper learned early that silence could be mistaken for peace. On a Tuesday evening in late October, rain traced slow, deliberate paths down the tall windows of their craftsman-style home in Queen Anne. Seattle wore its familiar gray like a second skin, and inside the house the air smelled faintly of roasted garlic and something burned just enough to suggest distraction rather than neglect. Olivia stood at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with practiced indifference. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, the same face Daniel had once believed could anchor him through anything. Ava and Lily sat at the dining table behind her, earbuds in, laughter contained within private screens, an invisible wall of soundless exclusion. Daniel carried the pasta pot to the sink and drained it slowly, buying time. He had learned the rhythm of this house, the pauses, the unspoken rules, the way his presence registered less as a person and more as an inconvenience. "Dinner's ready," he said, keeping his voice even. Ava, 16, glanced up briefly. Her eyes flicked over him, not hostile, worse dismissive. Lily didn't look up at all. Olivia didn't either. The four of them ate together, the way families do when they want to believe proximity equals connection. Forks scraped plates. The rain outside grew heavier. Daniel watched Olivia laugh at something on her phone, a video, maybe a message, and felt a small, irrational jealousy toward whatever had captured her attention more fully than he could. It hadn't always been like this. 2 years earlier, when Daniel first met Olivia at a charity gala downtown, she had told him about her daughters within the first 15 minutes. It wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. "They're my world," she'd said, her voice steady, eyes searching his face for any sign of retreat. He hadn't retreated. He had believed foolishly, perhaps, that love was additive, that by loving her he could become part of what already existed rather than something competing with it. But families, he would later learn, were not equations. They were fault lines. After dinner, Ava pushed her plate away. "Mom, you said you'd drive me to Mia's?" Olivia looked at Daniel, just briefly, a glance heavy with implication. "Daniel, could you clean up tonight?" It wasn't a question. "Sure," he said. By the time the door closed behind them, laughter echoing down the front steps, the house felt cavernous. Daniel stood alone at the sink, hands submerged in warm water, staring at his distorted reflection in the stainless steel. He thought of the first night Ava had looked him in the eye and said, "You're not our dad." He hadn't tried to be. He thought of Lily deleting him from social media quietly, deliberately, while keeping Olivia tagged in every smiling post. He thought of the parent-teacher conference where his name hadn't appeared on the sign-in sheet, and no one had noticed except him. That night, Olivia returned late. Her movements were careful, as though the house itself might be sleeping. "Daniel?" she called softly. "I'm in the living room." She sat across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. For a moment she looked tired, vulnerable. It almost softened him. "Ava's been struggling," she said. "They both have." He nodded. "I know." "They feel like you're trying to replace their father. I've never done that." "I know," Olivia said quickly, then slower. "But maybe you could try harder to make them feel comfortable." The words landed quietly, but their weight was unmistakable. "Try harder how?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. That pause, that small delay, told him everything. She didn't have an answer. She just needed the discomfort to belong to someone else. "I just need you to be patient," she said. "They come first." Daniel leaned back, eyes drifting to the family photos lining the mantel. Smiling faces, a narrative carefully constructed. "I'm not asking to come first," he said. "I'm asking not to come last." Olivia looked away. And in that moment, Daniel felt something inside him begin to loosen. Not anger, not yet, but the slow unraveling of certainty. The quiet understanding that love, when unreciprocated in loyalty, becomes a form of self-erasure. Neither of them knew it then, but this was the beginning, not of the end, but of the leaving. By winter, Daniel began to understand that hostility did not always announce itself with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in politeness. Sometimes it smiled. The first snow of the season dusted Seattle in a thin, apologetic white, the kind that melted by noon but lingered in photographs. Olivia posted one that morning, the four of them on the front steps, Ava and Lily leaning into their mother, Daniel standing slightly apart, hands in his coat pockets. The caption read, "Family Mornings." Daniel saw the photo during a break at work. A colleague glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "Beautiful family," she said. He smiled back, reflexively. He had learned how to do that. At home, the small exclusions multiplied with the precision of a practiced hand. Ava created a shared calendar for family events that Daniel discovered accidentally, a color-coded schedule synced between Olivia and the girls, filled with dinners, outings, and movie nights he had never been told about. Lily began hosting friends over on weekends, always when Daniel was home, always treating him like a piece of furniture that couldn't answer back. They never insulted him directly. That would have been crude. Instead, they weaponized omission. "Mom, remember when we talked about this?" Ava would say, voice calm, reasonable, when Daniel questioned why he hadn't been invited. And Olivia, flustered, guilty, would reply, "I thought you knew." Daniel started working later. Not because he had to, but because the office felt neutral, a place where his presence didn't need justification. His firm had landed a major waterfront redevelopment project, and Daniel threw himself into it with the quiet desperation of a man trying to outrun something unnamed. At night, Olivia scrolled, always scrolling. She laughed more at her phone than at him now. When he reached for her in bed, her body responded with delay, like a signal traveling through interference. "I'm just tired," she said often. "I know," he replied. But tiredness, Daniel knew, did not explain avoidance. It did not explain the way conversation shortened, how shared silences turned brittle instead of warm. One Friday evening, he came home to find Ava crying at the kitchen table. Lily stood nearby, arms crossed. Olivia hovered, face pale. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Ava looked up, eyes red. "He embarrassed me." Daniel froze. "Who?" "You," Lily said flatly. "At school." Daniel's heart pounded. I haven't been to your school." "You commented on Ava's photo?" Ava said, voice trembling. "Everyone saw it." Daniel frowned. "I said, proud of you." Ava's voice cracked. "That's weird, Daniel. You're not my dad." The word hung there, weird, sharp, and final. Olivia stepped in quickly. "Daniel, maybe it's better if you don't comment on their posts. Teenagers are sensitive." He looked at her. Really looked. "You told me to support them," he said quietly. "Yes," but she stopped. Exhaled. "Just give them space. Space. Always space. A vacuum disguised as virtue." That night, Daniel deleted himself from their digital lives entirely. He unfollowed. Unliked. Unseen. The girls noticed immediately. Their relief was palpable. Olivia didn't thank him. She didn't acknowledge the small surrender. She only grew more distant, as though his retreat had confirmed something she'd been quietly hoping for. Weeks later, Daniel overheard a conversation he wasn't meant to. He was in the hallway, searching for a misplaced blueprint, when Ava's voice drifted from the living room. "He's so dramatic," Ava said. "He acts like everything's about him." Lily laughed. "Mom would choose us anyway." Daniel leaned against the wall, breath shallow. "You think?" Ava asked. "Obviously," Lily replied. "She already has." Silence followed. Then Olivia's voice, softer, hesitant. "Girls, it's complicated, but not enough to stop it." Daniel walked back to his office, closed the door, and sat in the dark. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what it would feel like to not be here. Not as a threat, not as leverage, just as a fact. When Olivia came to bed that night, she reached for him out of habit more than desire. He stayed still. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. She turned onto her side. "We'll figure it out." But Daniel already knew the truth she couldn't say out loud. They weren't figuring anything out. They were waiting him out, and slowly, deliberately, he was becoming a guest in a life he helped build, standing on the outside of a family that had decided it did not need him. Not yet, but soon. The realization did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, a look held too long, a truth bent just enough to break, a loyalty quietly reassigned when no one was supposed to be watching. Daniel first noticed it during the email. It arrived on a Wednesday morning while he was reviewing zoning plans at his desk. The subject line was unmistakable. Parent meeting, immediate attention required. The sender was the vice principal at Ava's high school. Daniel opened it, expecting confusion, maybe a scheduling error. Instead, he read words that made his stomach tighten. Mr. Harper, we need to address concerns raised regarding inappropriate conduct toward a student during last Friday's school fundraiser. His breath caught. The accusation was vague, careful phrased in the cautious language of liability and optics. A volunteer had reported that Daniel had been overly familiar with Ava in public, touching her shoulder, standing too close. It was absurd and dangerous. Daniel called Olivia immediately. She didn't answer. He left work early, driving home with a pressure behind his eyes that felt like the warning before a storm. When he arrived, Olivia was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with Ava. Lily hovered near the stairs, half present, half listening. Olivia looked up. We need to talk. Daniel glanced at Ava. Why didn't you tell them the truth? Ava's jaw tightened. I did. You didn't, Lily said coolly. You just don't see how it looks. Daniel turned to Olivia. You know me. Olivia folded her hands together. I know you wouldn't mean anything inappropriate. The word mean sliced deeper than any accusation. So what did you tell them, he asked. That maybe you were trying too hard, Olivia said. That boundaries can be misunderstood. Daniel stared at her. You let them think I crossed a line. I protected my daughters, she replied, her voice trembling but firm. There it was. Not a shout, not a declaration, a decision. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat alone in the school office, a polite administrator explaining policies while carefully avoiding eye contact. The meeting ended without formal action, but the damage had already been done. He walked out feeling watched, diminished, marked by something invisible and permanent. That night, Olivia avoided him. Ava didn't. She stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You didn't have to make it such a big deal, she said. Daniel looked up slowly. You let them think I was dangerous. Ava shrugged. You made me uncomfortable. The lie was effortless. I was proud of you, he said quietly. Ava's eyes flickered, not with guilt, but calculation. That's not your job. She walked away. Daniel sat there long after, staring at the door. The truth settled in with brutal clarity. Olivia had chosen a narrative where he was expendable, where his integrity could be negotiated if it preserved her daughter's peace. From that day on, Olivia's affection turned conditional. She measured her words, avoided conflict, redirected conversations away from anything that might implicate the girls. When Lily began skipping classes, Olivia blamed stress. When Ava lied, Olivia called it coping. Daniel became the problem simply by existing as an alternative truth. They stopped sharing meals regularly. Olivia ate with the girls. Daniel ate late or alone. On weekends, Olivia planned outings for the girls without mentioning them until they were already gone. When Daniel tried to speak, Olivia's face tightened, not with anger, but with fatigue. I can't fight everyone, she said one night. I need peace in this house. And what about me? Daniel asked. She didn't answer. He began sleeping lightly, waking before dawn, lying beside a woman whose body no longer turned toward his. He wondered when love had become something to ration, when loyalty had been redefined as proximity rather than truth. One evening, he overheard Olivia on the phone. I just need him to stop pushing, she whispered. If he loved us, he'd understand. Us. Daniel stood in the hallway, unseen. The word echoed louder than any argument they'd ever had. That night, he packed a small bag not to leave. Not yet, but to see how it felt. The weight of it in his hand was sobering, grounding, real. He placed it back in the closet before bed. But something had already shifted. Belonging, he realized, was not something you could demand. It was something you were either granted or slowly stripped of, one quiet betrayal at a time. And Olivia, without ever saying the words aloud, had made her choice. The argument began the way most things in their house did now, quietly, deceptively calm, already bruised by everything that had been left unsaid. It was a Sunday afternoon in early spring. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows for the first time in weeks, illuminating dust in the air and the fault lines in the silence between them. Ava and Lily were out with friends. the house temporarily neutral territory. Daniel stood by the window, watching Olivia move around the kitchen with mechanical precision. She wiped an already clean counter, straightened a stack of mail, avoided his eyes. "We need to talk," he said. Her shoulders stiffened. "About what?" "About us," he replied. "About the fact that I don't exist in this family anymore." Olivia exhaled sharply as if bracing herself. "That's not fair, isn't it?" He turned to face her. "I was accused of something I didn't do. You let it stand. You didn't even ask me how I was." "I was protecting my daughters," she said, the phrase now reflexive. "At my expense?" She slammed the drawer shut. The sound cracked through the room. "You don't understand what it's like to be their mother." "No," Daniel said evenly, "but I understand what it's like to be sacrificed." Her eyes flashed. "They've been through enough. So have I." The words hung there, heavy and unwanted. Olivia crossed her arms. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Daniel laughed softly, a humorless sound that surprised even him. "Harder than being treated like a threat in my own home?" "You're not a threat," she snapped, "but you don't know when to back off." "Back off from what? Loving them? Supporting them? Existing?" Her voice rose. "They didn't ask for you, and I didn't ask to be erased." Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. Olivia looked away first. When she spoke again, her tone had changed colder, steadier, resolved. "They are my daughters," she said. "They will always come first." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've never asked you to choose." "But you are," she said, "every day, with your resentment, your tension, your inability to just accept things as they are." He felt something inside him give way, not in anger, but in clarity. "Accept what?" he asked quietly. "That I don't matter?" She swallowed. Her jaw tightened. "If you can't accept my daughters," Olivia said, each word deliberate, rehearsed, "then you should leave." The sentence landed with terrifying finality. Daniel stared at her, waiting for the retraction, the softening, the realization of what she had just offered. None came. In that moment, something in him went still. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded. "Okay," he said. Olivia blinked. "Daniel, I heard you." She stepped toward him, confusion flickering across her face. "I didn't mean I just needed you to understand how serious this is." "I do," he replied. "That's why I'm leaving." Her breath caught. "You're just going to walk out?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. Daniel walked past her and down the hallway. He opened the closet and took out the bag he had packed weeks earlier. He moved through the house with a calm that felt almost unreal, gathering only what was necessary. No photos. No keepsakes. Nothing that belonged to a life he was no longer welcome in. Olivia followed him, panic replacing certainty. "You're being dramatic." He paused at the front door and turned to face her. "No," he said softly. "I'm being obedient." The word stung. He saw it in her eyes. "What about us?" she asked. Daniel looked around the house, the staged photos, the carefully curated warmth that had never included him fully. "There hasn't been an us for a long time." He opened the door. Spring air rushed in, cool and unfamiliar. For a brief second, Olivia looked like she might say something else. Something real. But she didn't. Daniel stepped outside and closed the door behind him. He stood on the porch for a moment, bag at his feet, listening to the house settle the quiet creaks of a structure returning to balance after removing excess weight. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt light, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and the disbelief, was a certainty Olivia had never seen coming. He would not beg to be chosen again. The first night after he left, Daniel slept in a hotel overlooking Elliott Bay. The room smelled faintly of detergent and sea air, the kind of neutral anonymity designed to hold no memories. He lay awake until dawn, listening to the distant hum of traffic and ferries cutting through the dark, waiting for grief to arrive the way it was supposed to. It didn't. What came instead was a strange, disorienting calm, the absence of vigilance. No footsteps to interpret, no silences to decode, no quiet calculations about how much space his presence was allowed to occupy. In the morning, he stood beneath the shower until the water ran cold, then dressed and went to work as if the world had not shifted on its axis. Within weeks, Daniel rented a small apartment near Capitol Hill. It was nothing like the house he'd left behind. No backyard, no staged family portraits, no echoes of conversations that never quite included him. The place was spare and undecorated, sunlight pooling across hardwood floors in the afternoon. For the first time in years, every object in his space existed because he had chosen it. He bought one chair, one table, one lamp. It was enough. At the firm, his focus sharpened. Colleagues noticed it before he did, the way he stayed later without resentment, how his designs grew bolder, more assured. He was no longer distracted by the quiet erosion of his home life, no longer expending energy proving he belonged somewhere he didn't. When the waterfront project won national recognition, Daniel stood on a stage in Chicago, accepting applause that felt unreal. His phone buzzed in his pocket afterward, a text from Olivia. "Can we talk?" He stared at the screen for a long moment, then slid the phone back into his pocket without replying. Back in Seattle, Olivia's house had grown louder, not with joy, but with friction. Without Daniel absorbing the tension, it had nowhere to go. Ava stayed out later now, stopped explaining herself. Lily's grades slipped. Arguments flared over curfews, over money, over respect. Olivia found herself enforcing rules she had once delegated to Daniel and resenting the authority she'd insisted on holding alone. At night, the house felt too big. She noticed the empty space first in practical ways, the way the trash piled up faster. How the car made unfamiliar sounds she didn't know how to interpret. Then in quieter moments, standing in the kitchen, reaching instinctively for a second mug, pausing mid-sentence because there was no one left who cared about the ending. She told herself this was normal, necessary, that Daniel had been incompatible with the reality of her life, but the certainty she'd worn like armor began to crack. One evening, she opened her laptop and scrolled through old photos, not the curated ones she posted online, but the unfiltered archive no one else saw. Daniel sitting on the floor helping Lily with a science project. Daniel watching Ava from the audience at a debate competition, pride softening his face. She closed the laptop quickly, as if the images might accuse her. Daniel, meanwhile, began to understand something unexpected about solitude. It was not empty. He cooked for himself, discovering preferences he'd never noticed, the way he liked his coffee stronger, his music louder. He ran along the waterfront early in the mornings, breath burning, body reclaiming space. In the evenings, he read, thought. Let memories pass without wrestling them into meaning. He did not stalk Olivia's social media. He did not ask mutual friends for updates. The absence of her life from his was not a punishment, it was a boundary. One night, as rain streaked down his apartment windows, Daniel sat at his desk and opened a document he hadn't planned to write. It wasn't a letter to Olivia, it was a list. Things he would no longer accept. He wrote slowly, deliberately, being tolerated instead of chosen. Having his integrity questioned for someone else's comfort, confusing endurance with love. He stopped when the list filled one page. Across the city, Olivia stood in the doorway of Ava's room, listening to her daughter shout into the phone. "You always take her side," Ava yelled. "You're just like him." The words struck harder than Olivia expected. Later that night, Lily accused her of being controlling. Ava accused her of favoritism. Olivia retreated to her bedroom and closed the door, sitting on the edge of the bed where Daniel used to sleep. For the first time, there was no one left to blame. Weeks passed, then months. When Olivia finally saw Daniel again, it was by accident. A charity event downtown, the same kind of room where they had first met. Daniel stood near the bar, older somehow, but steadier. His posture had changed. His presence no longer asked permission. Olivia hesitated before approaching him. "Daniel," she said. He turned, surprise flickering briefly before settling into calm recognition. Olivia. "You look well," she said. "So do you," he replied politely. Not warmly, not coldly, just truthfully. There was so much she wanted to say, explanations, apologies, revisions of history that might place her in a kinder light. Instead, she asked, "Are you happy?" Daniel considered the question. Yes, he said. I am. The answer hollowed her. As he walked away, Olivia understood something she had refused to see before. Daniel hadn't left to punish her. He had left to save himself. And in doing so, he had taken with him the quiet stability she had mistaken for something she could afford to lose. She stood alone in the crowd, realizing too late that the fracture in her household had not begun with his departure. It had begun with the moment she believed love could survive without loyalty. The first call came from the school. Olivia was at work, halfway through a client presentation, when her phone vibrated insistently against the conference table. She ignored it once, then twice. On the third vibration, something in her chest tightened. She excused herself, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and stepped into the hallway. Mrs. Brooks, the counselor said, there's been an incident involving Ava. The word incident had become a familiar euphemism, a soft wrapper around consequences no one wanted to name. By the time Olivia reached the school, Ava was sitting in the office, arms folded, jaw set in defiance. Lily sat beside her, silent but vibrating with contained fury. What happened? Olivia asked. Ava rolled her eyes. They're overreacting. The vice principal cleared his throat. Your daughter was caught altering another student's presentation files. It appears intentional. Sabotage. Olivia felt a flash of disbelief, followed by something more dangerous recognition. She had seen this before, just never aimed so openly outward. On the drive home, the girls argued in the back seat, voices sharp, unfiltered. This is your fault, Lily snapped. You told me to stand up for myself, Ava shot back. Not like that. Olivia gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. Daniel's voice surfaced in her memory, calm, measured warning her months ago about boundaries, about accountability. She had dismissed it as criticism. At home, the house felt different now. Not empty or louder, chaotic, uncontained. Without Daniel, there was no buffer, no quiet presence absorbing impact. Every conflict ricocheted back at her. Lily stopped coming home on time. Ava stopped pretending to care. They challenged every rule, questioned every decision, weaponized Olivia's guilt with precision, honed over years of unchallenged loyalty. You said we come first, Ava reminded her whenever Olivia tried to impose consequences. And Olivia had no answer that didn't contradict herself. One night, Lily didn't come home at all. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, phone clutched in her hand, staring at the door like it might open if she stared hard enough. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. When Lily finally stumbled in, smelling faintly of alcohol and defiance, Olivia exploded. Where were you? She demanded. Do you have any idea you don't get to control everything? Lily shouted back. You're not him. The words hit harder than any insult. Olivia froze. Don't say that, she said. Why not? Lily scoffed. You liked it better when he did the parenting you didn't want to do. Silence fell between them, raw and exposed. Lily stormed past her and slammed the bedroom door. Olivia sank into a chair, the house suddenly too loud with its own echoes. For the first time, she allowed the thought she had been outrunning since Daniel left to fully form. He wasn't the problem. In the weeks that followed, the cracks widened. Ava was suspended for plagiarism. Lily was caught shoplifting with friends she refused to name. Olivia spent evenings fielding calls, writing apology emails, sitting in parking lots wondering when her life had become something she no longer recognized. She stopped posting on social media. The mirror she avoided most, however, was internal. Late one night, unable to sleep, Olivia opened a box she had shoved into the back of the closet, Daniel's box. Papers he hadn't taken. Notes, a leather-bound journal she'd never asked about. She hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations, no rage, just observations. Trying to love without permission feels like trespassing. I wonder when silence became safer than honesty. I don't need to be chosen first. I just don't want to be chosen last. Olivia closed the journal, tears blurring the words. She remembered moments she had reframed to protect herself. Daniel insisting on accountability. Daniel asking to be included. Daniel refusing to disappear quietly. She had called it pressure. It had been presence. Across the city, Daniel noticed the absence before he noticed the change. He no longer thought about Olivia daily. The ache had softened into something manageable, a scar rather than a wound. But when mutual friends began hesitating mid-sentence, when conversations shifted awkwardly away from her name, he sensed the imbalance. One evening, he received a message from Lily. "I know I shouldn't be texting you." He stared at the screen for a long moment. "I just wanted to say, things are bad here." Daniel typed a response. Deleted it. Typed again. "I'm sorry you're struggling," he finally wrote. "But this is something you need to talk to your mother about." There was no reply. Daniel set the phone down, heart heavy but steady. He had learned the cost of rescuing people who mistook support for surrender. Olivia, meanwhile, stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning and barely recognized herself. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders perpetually tense. A woman exhausted by loyalty unreturned. She thought of the words she had thrown at Daniel like a challenge. "If you can't accept my daughter's leave." She had believed that love meant choosing without question. She was beginning to understand that love without accountability was not protection. It was permission. The house, once so carefully curated, now reflected back the consequences of that belief. And in every argument, every slammed door, every late-night call, Olivia saw a truth she could no longer ignore. Daniel had not destabilized her family. He had been holding it together. And without him, the mirror she avoided was finally forcing her to look. The encounter happened on an ordinary morning, the kind that pretends nothing irreversible has ever occurred. Daniel was at the Pike Place Market, standing in line for coffee, the air thick with roasted beans and salt from the sound. He had come early before the tourists, before the city fully woke. It was part of a routine he had built, carefully predictable, grounding his. Daniel? He turned at the sound of his name, already knowing who it would be. Olivia stood a few feet away, holding a paper bag that sagged slightly in the middle. She looked thinner, not in a dramatic way, but in the way of someone whose life had narrowed without permission. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel nodded once. "Olivia, I didn't know you came here," she said, as if that mattered. "I didn't before," he replied. They stood in line together, an accidental intimacy neither of them had chosen. The barista called the next order. The city moved around them, indifferent. "How are you?" Olivia asked. Daniel considered the question the way he now considered most things, without rushing to make them easier for someone else. "I'm steady," he said. She nodded, absorbing the word. "That's good." They stepped aside with their drinks, finding a narrow table near the window. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was careful, a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer entitled to each other's emotional comfort. "I didn't plan to run into you," Olivia said finally, "but I've thought about it." "Me too," Daniel said, "just not in the way you're hoping." Her breath caught. "I'm not hoping for anything." He met her eyes gently but firmly. "You are." She looked down at her coffee, fingers tightening around the cup. "Things are hard," she said, "with the girls." "I know." "You do?" she asked, surprised. "They reached out," Daniel said. "I redirected them back to you." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "Of course you did." For the first time since they'd sat down, emotion cracked through her composure. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying," she said. "I told myself you were strong, that you could handle it." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Strength is in silence," he said. "It's honesty that's allowed to exist." She swallowed. "I was afraid of losing them." "So you lost us," he replied, not accusing, just stating a fact. The truth settled between them, undeniable. "I'm sorry," Olivia said. The words were soft, unadorned, finally stripped of justification. "I chose wrong." Daniel watched her carefully. He had imagined this moment once, the apology, the recognition, the possibility that understanding might reopen to something closed. But standing there now, he felt no pull. "I don't think you chose wrong," he said slowly. "I think you chose consistently." She flinched. "You chose what made you feel safest in the moment," he continued. "What you couldn't see was the cost." Tears filled her eyes. "Is there any way?" "No," Daniel said gently. "Not because I don't care, but because I finally do." She looked at him, then really looked and saw something she hadn't expected. Not bitterness, not triumph. Peace. I'm not angry, he added, but I won't go back to a place where my worth is conditional. The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. I miss you, Olivia whispered. I know, Daniel said, but missing someone doesn't mean you're meant to have them again. They sat in silence, the weight of all the lives they might have lived pressing down without hope of revision. I thought if I understood, Olivia said, it would change things. Understanding is for closure, Daniel replied, not reclamation. When they stood to leave, Olivia hesitated, then reached out not to touch him, but to stop herself from doing so. I never thought you'd actually leave, she admitted. Daniel looked at her with something close to kindness. I never thought you'd ask me to. They walked out of the cafe separately. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. Vendors shouted. Seagulls cried. Life continued, indifferent to reckoning. Olivia stood on the sidewalk long after Daniel disappeared into the crowd. The truth finally undeniable. What she had lost was not a marriage. It was the version of herself that believed love did not require sacrifice, only presence. And Daniel, walking away for the last time, understood something just as clearly. Some endings don't ask to be healed. They ask to be honored. Daniel's life did not transform overnight. There was no dramatic reinvention, no public declaration of rebirth, no photographs captioned with words like healing or new beginnings. What changed was quieter and far more permanent. He stopped measuring himself against the past. On a warm June morning, nearly a year after he left Olivia's house, Daniel signed the lease on a small townhouse overlooking the water just south of the city. It wasn't ambitious or symbolic. It simply felt right. The light moved through the rooms in a way that made time feel unhurried. When he stood at the window, coffee in hand, there was no sense of absence, only space. He had learned that peace rarely announces itself. It settles. Work continued to challenge him in ways that felt clean, honest. His name began circulating in conversations that once felt out of reach, invitations to speak, to mentor, to lead. Not because he had chased them harder, but because he was finally present enough to accept them without fear of what they might cost at home. Sometimes late at night, he thought of Olivia, not with longing, with understanding. Across the city, Olivia's days grew narrower. The girls were still there, physically, but something essential had fractured beyond repair. Ava left for college early, choosing distance over reconciliation. Lily remained, but their relationship was brittle. Marked by resentment and unmet expectations, neither of them knew how to name. The house was quieter now, not peaceful hollow. Olivia stopped telling herself stories about how things could have been. The truth had become unavoidable. She had mistaken control for protection, silence for harmony, endurance for love. One evening, she stood in the same kitchen where she had once issued an ultimatum she believed would never be tested. The counters gleamed. The photos remained. But the narrative they had framed no longer held. She finally said his name out loud. Alone. Daniel. There was no answer. Weeks later, Olivia attended a small gallery opening downtown, not for pleasure, but out of obligation. A colleague had insisted. She wandered through the space, barely registering the art, until she saw him across the room. Daniel stood near a large window, laughing softly with a woman beside him. The woman wasn't younger, wasn't flashy. She touched Daniel's arm casually, comfortably, not as a claim, but as a fact. He leaned toward her without hesitation. Olivia felt the moment like a physical blow. This was what she had never seen coming. Not his success, not his survival, his ease. He was not proving anything, not to her, not to the world. He had moved on without spectacle. Daniel noticed her only as she turned to leave. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for recognition. He nodded once, a gesture free of bitterness or invitation. It was enough. Olivia stepped outside into the evening air, heart pounding, understanding, settling with merciless clarity. He had not left to be missed. He had left to be free. That night, Olivia sat at her desk and opened a blank document. She didn't write to Daniel. She didn't write to the girls. She wrote to herself. I thought love meant standing my ground. I didn't realize it also meant standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. I believe people who love me would stay no matter what. I never asked what staying was costing them. She closed the laptop when the words ran out. There would be no reunion, no cinematic return, no absolution that erased consequence. Only acceptance. Daniel, meanwhile, walked home with the woman from the gallery. Her name was Claire, talking about nothing urgent, nothing heavy. The city glowed around them, familiar and newly intimate. As they reached his door, Claire paused. "You okay?" she asked gently. He smiled. "Yeah, I really am." Inside, Daniel stood by the window one last time before bed, watching the lights ripple across the water. He thought of the man he had been, patient to the point of disappearance, loyal without protection, loving without boundaries. He did not judge that man. He thanked him, because leaving had not been an act of revenge. It had been an act of self-recognition, and that more than anything was what Olivia had never seen coming.